Okay.
I think the internet here is horrible.
Yep.
I'm alive now.
Okay.
I think the internet here is horrible.
Yep.
Right. I'm alive now.
Okay.
I think the internet here is
I also printed out the thing. Is that already print? I also printed out. I don't know if it's needed.
Give it to me.
This one?
J'ai imprimé les papiers.
Oh, I also printed out.
Okay,
as
well,
well.
this way then.
Okay.
Okay, so
I need one. I need one.
so I give it to you.
And these are the reports.
Yes.
And if I may,
Yeah, you can. Yeah,
I'm
for sure.
supposed to have them, but
Sure,
I
sure,
didn't
sure.
get them.
Okay. So,
Non, on n'a pas eu les rapports. Voilà. J'ai pas voulu te rajouter un SMS en disant
Non, mais c'est
je n'ai pas les rapports. Mais c'est quand même utile de les avoir. Normalement, on est censé les avoir. Test connectif. C'est déjà pas mal. Hein.
Yeah.
So, okay, see video, see
Yeah, can you hear me?
oh yeah, that's great. Okay, I can
Okay,
hear you.
good. Yeah, my microphone was getting misrouted. Yeah, my speaker actually, so I'm good now.
Okay, great.
I'll just go back on mute until I
Okay.
have something to say. Good luck today. I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you.
So the student is going to attend for Non, c'est j'ai du mal, moi, à le faire. C'est comme moi,
C'est pas beau. En même temps, pour nous, les 20 il n'y avait pas de question non plus. C'était plus tard.
pour lui. Dans les trois rapports, on peut s'exprimer bien à lui. Can you send the link to Victoria because she doesn't have the link?
Okay. Okay. Oops. Oh, site's closed. Good. Oh my god. Okay, let's find a link. Okay. So, where's the link? Check point. Yes, involved.
Cameraman.
Hello.
How did I not have the link?
I think I sent it to you. Okay, maybe it's my fault. Anyways, and I didn't open my mail application.
Well, anyway, I'm here now. And you've got it all in text as well.
Great. Okay, so okay, I will just share my screen. And here we go. And I will do hide my video camera. Like this. Okay. You wanna say something or?
Sure.
Yeah.
I will.
Yeah.
So we are going to start the PhD defense of Han, right?
Yeah.
So you will have 45 minutes, followed by a lot of questions, and I'm very happy to be the president of this committee today.
Great. Okay. So yeah, I'm just gonna start. You know why? A lot of people ask me what I've been working on my PhD, and I said documents, and they were like, "What? Why? Why documents? I thought you were working on some cool technologies." So I guess I probably start the presentation by asking that question: why documents interface even matter? And I think for the simple and most obvious reasons, is just because many people using them every day. 1,000 people to read documents to get access to the information, and to produce documents to communicate with the information. It's really part of their lives and work. And also from a design perspective, Henry Dreyfuss, one of the pioneers of industrial design, said to look ahead, one wants to learn to look back. So if you look back, all words come from the documents interface. That will allow us to trace back to the Xerox star, where it's all actually the GUI, the graphical user interface, coming from. And the designer of Xerox star has emphasized the importance of documents. And they said the documents is the heart of the world and unifies it. But during the past 40 years, the documents interface has not really changed that much. I give you an example of this. Here are 3 documents interface to manage your files. So we have Star, we have Windows, we have Mac OS. If you compare them, the visuals, how they look, has really changed. They have better color or better beautiful icon. However, how they work, it still remains the same. It's still based on the same hierarchical structure. So given the importance of these documents impacting many people's lives, I ask myself this question: how can we still improve it? I guess to improve anything, the first step you need to figure out is what is hard about it and why it is hard. So I personally have 2 assumptions here. The first is the users don't think documents interface can be better. Second is designers don't think it's sexy. The second question, I'll let you designers decide by yourself. I will focus on the first one here. Users don't think can be better. When I think about it, I think it's pretty 2 bold statements. So I would say maybe 99% of users actually don't think can be better. But you might ask, okay, how about another 1%? And for me, that 1%, they do think it can be better because they're extreme users. They're extreme users who situated extreme situation, often with complex tasks. They often have to push the boundary of technology to innovate. And that's a great source of innovation. So I give you an example here. Here's a Tim Berners-Lee, who's the inventor of World Wide Web. At that time, he's a great example of extreme user innovation. At that time, he was working for the European Nuclear Research Center in Geneva, and he has this problem. The French part and the Swiss part, they don't really talk to each other using different systems. So he's like, okay, how do we solve this? And to solve this problem, he developed the HTTP protocol and wrote the first web server and web browser. And that have paved the way for today's World Wide Web, which has a huge impact on our society today. So my thesis, in a very summarized way, is to really by focus on those extreme users and taking on a principled perspective, I believe we can design effective and flexible representations that to support this document-related knowledge work. And I want to show, in this talk, I'm going to show 3 examples to demonstrate these statements. And of course, since I'm a basketball player, I'm a team player, so all of this project has been highly collaborative with some cool colleagues here. And just by the way, we know the news like from the documents analysis work, which also win an honorable mention award for this year, Kai. So now let's jump into the first part, which is look at the documents editing. So we ask for our methodology with lead user, we ask ourselves, okay, who's the extreme user of text editing? Well, we think about lawyers and legal professionals. And the reason why they make it extreme, because what you write really have consequences. Any mistake on your legal contract or documents could have financial, economical, and legal consequences. And they have to be really careful about this. So our process follows. We start with some critical incident interview with them, trying to figure out what are the common issues and problems here. And then we start to prototyping them, trying to see how we can improve them. And later on, we'll do a structured observation and trying to see if it works. So let's first look at the critical incident interview with them. So in this interview, we really focus on some simple questions. What do they do? The tasks. How do they do it? The strategies. And how do they fail if they didn't make it happen, if they achieve what they want to achieve? The breakdowns. And how do they solve it? The workaround and innovations. So I'll give you some concrete examples of the question we'll ask them would be, can you show me the most complicated documents you have been working on recently? or can you walk me through the step-by-step process of creating those documents? So I conducted 12 interviews with lawyers. We went to offices, look at how they create those documents. And we can analyze our data using thematic analysis. And here are some of the selected results. So first, they have to repetitively check the word limits. What do I mean by this? So here's the page of the European Patent Office Convention. And if you pay attention to a little bit constraints here, and you will see they actually say that the abstract should preferably not contain more than 150 words. So that's really a kind of constraint here. And if you look at our current interface, current software, how we can count a piece of words, let's look at it. So I select a piece of text. I have this button here. We can also get access to it. So I can see the word count. And I start typing, editing my text. Of course, because here it only counts the whole document. I cannot see it anymore. So I have to reselect it and click here again and to see it. So as you can see, the problem becomes kind of repetitive while you are actively editing it. And second, they also have to use the same term over across the whole documents. And if they want to change any term, for example, the clients want to change any term, they have to make sure the changes is also done consistently. For example, if you change a noun to another one which have different gender, and they also need to change the article, which is very true for our French users here. And they use the search and replace function. There's one of the powerful, but they don't use replace all. They say it's too risky and they prefer doing manually. So if you take a look about how search and replace work in today's documents in a word processor, you see I put a search string and I replace it with position status. I have a list of occurrences here. Once I replace the first one, but I don't know which one have been replaced, it's gone. I cannot trace it. I don't know what happened. So really the problem here is that users don't know what happened when you replace something. So the last one is they really need to try different alternative wording. So they have the same thing, they want to convey the same meaning, but they're trying different ways to convey it. And they use track changes. So track changes is one of the functionality of a word processor you can compare. You can track all your changes have you done through the documents. But they said it's introduced more problems and it's really difficult to understand. So what we think the problem here is track changes track the whole documents level. No matter you have 100 pages, it tracks the whole documents level. And that's the intermediate version we just want to keep. So with all this common issue identified, we say how we can improve it. So we start our prototyping session. We develop paper prototypes. Here's my setup. I give you an example of my paper prototype here. For example, this user wants to remove all the reference numbers. So she decides to using search and replace to do that. You can see I have my cursor here. I can grab this search and replace tools. I apply to my selection of text. And I have this search and replace dialog box here. And I can, using some regular expression or some way to catch all the numbers in my text. Here, instead of clicking a button, I directly interact with the text, with the number I want to replace. And each replacement will leave the trace so I can always know which have been replaced. And if I don't want to replace them, if you regret, change my mind, I can also undo it, just click it. So with all this idea coming together, and we develop our proof of concept prototype, which we call TextLets. So the concept of the TextLets is really trying to challenge some fundamental mechanism of text editing, which is the selection. So how selection work? So I select a piece of text. I can apply the different commands from toolbar or a context menu to affect the content of that selection. But as soon as I select the next text, the previous selection is gone. If I want to do something with it, I have to reselect it. So text is trying to challenge this idea and trying to make selection as a persistent object. As we can see here, I can select my piece of text, I create a text list, which is a persistent object here, and this object is synchronized with the text in the main document. I can create as many texts as I want. And to reselect them, I can just simply click on it, and I can change the content by applying the commands to it. I can delete the text if I don't need it. So the real power of text is not only just having this object, but once you have this object, you can play around with it. That's what we call behaviors. And now I want to show 3 examples of behaviors developed by text based on the concept text. First, countlets help you to count piece of words. So right now with countlets, if you want to count a piece of words, I directly select the piece of text, and I create the word count list over there. And I can see the counter directly 181 words. I can adjust my range to the counter which I want. And I can also set a threshold of my counter, 80 to 150 words, for example. As soon as I start to editing my text, you can see the counter actually updating in real time. And notice the color of the counter right now is green. And when it meets the constraint, it turns red to green. So that's about count lists. And we also have one for search and replace task. It helps you to kind of make a consistency of your the terms in your documents. So for example, here our user wants to do this. I can create a insert search list on the side, what we call search list. I can reselect it by double click on it with the basic behavior. I can highlight it in the different colors in the main text. I can also show it a different occurrence on the side panel. I can create as many search lists as you want, and I highlight it in different colors in the main text, also show it on the side. And the user can drag one occurrences to another one, for example. And here, let's say I want to replace a word. I want to replace insert by inject. So first, it allows me to check the context around the second occurrence to see if I want a replacement. No, I don't want to. I ignore it. I can directly decide to individually replace the third and fourth one. And now I want to try replace all. But even though I try replace all and leave the traces, I can see, okay, I don't want to change this. So I can revert back to it. So based on a little bit a paper prototype I showed you before. And I can deactivate it if I don't need it. And the last one, variant lists allow you to really focus on the local versions, trying different local variation of the text. For example, I'll give you a simple example here. Right now I want to try a different version for my title because that's the most important part. So I can create a variant list like this. And I see I don't want to use device. It's a very simple example. I want to use apparatus. But the system will keep track of the device we have it before, so I have a local version so I can toggle back and forth to see which one actually fits better. So with all this proof of concept prototype, we want to see, okay, does it really work? To conduct a structured observational study with to see if it really works. Our goal is to really gather this first-hand feedback and to see their behaviors. I have 4 pattern writers, 4 researchers participate in the study, and search and replace task, as I showed before. And the procedure follows the Think Aloud protocol. We first give tryout and demo for 10 minutes, and then they will use their own editor to do the task. And later on, they use search lists to do the tasks. And afterwards, we'll give a Likert scale questionnaire, and we'll do interview about their behavior experiences, and we'll show countlets and variants as well. So notice that the document set and application choices is actually counterbalanced. So here, some of them will try search lists first, and then use your own editors. So results have shown that more than 80% of users agrees that search is useful across multiple different tasks. And they also want to use it for their real work. As P3 said, I have this list of all the occurrences, so I want to do some replacement. I choose some of them, I can keep the whole list, I can always check. This is quite important. I do not need to proofread the whole text. So, but this thesis is about representations, right? So what do we have learned about representations so far? So if we look back to the Xerox Star interface, they are using a desktop metaphor, which means creates the digital representation that is similar to the physical office objects like folders, documents, files. The idea is trying to leverage this familiar knowledge of the user and trying to make the digital world less alien. However, I think one of the powerful representations not only represents things already have in the physical world, but we can also represent something in people's mind, like the semantic object people want to manipulate. Here, it's a text selection. It's this snippets of text. And by the process of reification, to turning them into the object, we can really, they can achieve also their task. And so that's the first part about documents editing. And now I want to look at a little bit about documents analysis. So prior work has really shown that documents analysis is pretty complicated, where it involves multiple activities. And through the first study, I have an opportunity to secure this collaboration with the European Patent Office, really to study their patent examination process as an extreme example of documents analysis. And our process goes to first interview some patent examiners, also interview with scientists. Together, we look at our common problems with documents management. Later on, we have our design concept by prototyping. We're able to evaluate those two concepts into user studies. So let's first look at interview with patent examiners, which I contacted with 12 examiners. So before I jump into some results, I give you some high-level picture of how patent examination works. So I have a patent writer here. I actually have an inventor. So inventor invented something to say, hey, I want to have a patent for it. And he will come to the patent, he has an invention, he'll come to the patent writer. Patent writer say, okay, understand the invention, and he will write a patent application, which is kind of a document describing what the invention is about. And he will send this application to the patent examiner. And once patent examiner look at this application, they have to do several tasks to determine if it's really patentable or not. Several tasks involved. They have to do search. They have to search for prior arts documents, compare different documents. They have to read them, annotate them, organize them, and they will write a summary report. They will eventually write a search report based on certain criteria about novelty, inventive steps, industrial implications, if it's really novel. And before that, they will send it also, these documents were reviewed by the second examiners, and later on we'll send it back to the patent writer. So that's the whole review process, but what are the challenges during this process? I will talk about 4 challenges here. First, transferring information across applications is pretty hard. So what do I mean by this? This patent institution developed more than 20 applications for specific activities. But from the user's perspective, they really have a hard time to manage this tags across those activities using specific applications. Give an example for this. P2 said, P means participants, right? One of the problems that examiners have is that there are so many tools and so many times you have to go here and there, so it's very cumbersome. A second problem is that to refine the snippet from multiple sources is tedious. So one of the things they have to do is always go back to the source of the information, and that is important. From this quote, we can understand how important it is. They said, what I've learned is that in the examination augmentation phase, it can be really helpful to cite a specific passage. If you read from the line that this functional feature is present, it does not mean that everyone else will read it. You have to explain it. If you don't, you will get a lengthy letter back. You have to explain it anyways, and it's a waste of time for both parties. This is why I'm often quoting complete sentences, saying that this feature is really there. Don't come back to me and say it's not here. But you really have to track all the where's the information as they move around to the provenance of information. But currently, this process has done manually and tediously. Another thing, informal search results disappears. So one of the applications is a search application where they can search for prior art documents. And in this application, they've done a pretty good job trying to keep track of the search results. However, since patents work on a very specific domains, sometimes they have to learn new terminologies to update their knowledge. For example, some of them where this is one of the database, online database to check new materials. But what happens is because those searches happens outside of the applications, so the results eventually didn't get kept, they get lost. Even patent examiner have to revisit them afterwards. And last one, automatic drafting ignores human expertise. One of the developer in the patent institution developed this tool. You can automatically generate the research report. I mean, that's great. I thought it's great. And by filling out some forms. But however, patent examiners really have this kind of mixed opinions about this. And while talking to them, I start to understand what is the real human value in their intellectual work. For example, it really lies on this human-to-human communication. As PH said, if you are moving into a direction where the communication will be automatically generated by computer, we'll be sending the message that we don't really do the intellectual work. So the patent attorneys will be less likely to be convinced. The same way I'm less likely to be convinced. So after I done the patent examiners, I was like, okay, does it only limit to patent examiners? So together with my colleagues who conduct the interview with scientists, we look at our results and they actually show similar findings. And with these similar findings, And with identify similar finding, we think about we can improve this by so we jump into our prototyping session. We did a lot of sketch. Here's my first draft of sketch. We also did some paper prototype. For example, one of the paper prototype, what I did here is to cite any specific documents on your text editor. You can directly, instead of going to the menus, endless menus, you can directly drag and drop these documents into your editor, and the system will automatically include citation like that. So with all these ideas, we're also taking to a proof of concept prototype, which we'll call passages. So the idea of passages is that instead of creating another app, we want to work on kind of interactive object that can work with multiple apps and leverage that power. For example, what is a passage? So passage is a thing. It's an interactive object that consists of two parts: the quote, which you selected from the source documents, and the user notes, which you wrote by yourself. And the power of passages is that you work with multiple applications. Here's some sample applications here. For example, you work with the Documents Viewer app, where you can read your document and select the passages that are interesting to you. You work with the Text Editor app, where you can directly include the passages into your report writing. You work with a Text Reader app, where you share a report with your colleagues. They can also get access to the source information. You work with the Search Engine app, where you can turn your passages into a search query also, but also collect the passages directly from the search results. You even work with a spreadsheets app, like a table environment, where you can compare different passages. And work with a Collage Canvas app, where you can move different passages around. I think similar to Yannick right now it's using. And so in summary, passages is really this kind of interactive object that can be manipulated, reused, and shared across multiple applications. I really want to give you a live demo for this, but for the limits of time, I'm really proud to show actually one of the recorded demo to give you a sense of what a passage is.
My colleague, Résumé, just sent me 3 research articles on point technique, a fundamental research topic in human-computer interaction, and she wanted me to compare those articles. So I'm just gonna first open those 3 articles in my viewer app.
So the first viewer app.
And I'm just gonna go to read the first one, area cursor. I'm gonna scroll down, and I see an interesting passage, so I'm just gonna select it. And make the passage. And I will type my notes.
So that's how you make a passage. You select a piece of text and make a passage.
Good. And I continue to scroll down. And continue to read. There's another passage, so let me just select it. And I will make another notes called clutter. So maybe a few days later, I want to check my notes. So I have my notes on my side here. And to see the note, I just click the first one, and I can see my passage get highlighted directly in the document. Let's say I have read all 3 research articles and collect my passages, and I want to compare them. So I'll open them in the table application, just like spreadsheets. And on my left-hand side, I have all the collected passages already categorized by their source papers for me. And to organize my passages, I'm just going to simply drag and drop them into the table like this. Just drag and drop. And then last one, let's say it one more time. Drag and drop. And I can also rename this column. So instead of dragging the passage one by one, I can also drag the paper title directly, just like this. So I can drag the paper title into the column. So what this does, it will move all the passages from that paper into the right column. So let's see it one more time. I can drag it to the right column. It's not pretty clear to me about difference among those papers. Let me just go ahead and write short summary to my colleague Résumé to tell her about it. But before I do that, I don't want to start from a blank page. So I already have my table here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click this button called Export by Row, and here it is. So what it does is to export all the content from my table directly to my editor to create the initial draft. Isn't that really cool? I can also trace down some of the citations here and double click on it to see the original content. As I'm writing my summary, I recall missing information. So I'm just gonna go ahead and take it. And so I'm just gonna go open my viewer here. And I'm just gonna open the second paper. Oh, here it is. I can collect it and make it a passage. And what I can do is I can drag it outside of my viewer window directly to my editor. Here it is. And I can also include it by dragging it up into my text area to include the passage. So what I'm showing here is a seamless transition of passages across different apps. Now I'm pretty happy about my draft. Maybe just send it to Whistle. So I can export it as HTML. Just gonna do that. And I will send it.
Oh, I just received hands review. Let's check what it did. I can easily drag and drop it in the reader to see the review. That seems really interesting. This part seems interesting. I'm gonna check the document source by double clicking it. That's interesting, but it still needs to be discussed with Han. So I'm gonna save it on the side. This last bit seems interesting too. I'm gonna save it too so I can discuss it with Han when we meet.
Yeah, I hope you get a feeling of what passage is about in this recorded demo here. And so we want to see if it really worked for our users. So we first conduct the design walkthrough with patent examiners. And the results show that the overall comments is that they find it an interesting and elegant concept. As before said, because we always deal with pieces of information. With this link, you can always navigate between the documents and to communicate. I think it's an elegant way of dealing with it. It's not rigid. You can move it around, always move it around. That's what I like. But they also have some critiques. One of the biggest critique is about you want more provenance information. So what do I mean by this? So here's an example I showed you before by including the passage directly into my editor to include it as a citation. But if you take a closer look here, what happens is what really get included is first the user's notes, which is in the brackets. In this case, is empty, but also the quote where you're selected from the source documents. But there's no information about where the quote is coming from, which source document is from, and people want that. And second, we also conduct a structural observational study with scientists to get more understanding of how they use passages. With 12 scientists here. And two favorite features really like it's first one, it's a provenance tracking. And said the provenance tracking is really good to be able to see the location of the citation in the regional documents. They also like the table exportation. They said the table exportation directly helps them to enables me to compare what I have. I like the fact that I can just export it for my writing instead of wasting it. And largely reuse the collected passages in the viewer later on for the writing and for the comparison. So more than, they use 77% of the passages and 88% of them in the editor. As P9 said, it feels great. I can directly use the notes for organization and writing. So come back to our topic. What do we have learned about representation here? In our zero star, we have one of the very powerful commands called universal commands, where you can use this command across applications. I guess any one of you sitting down here use commands, for example, copy, paste, and delete, that kind of thing. And the design rationale behind it is really that those kind of commands strip away the extraneous application-specific semantics to get at the underlying principle. And I think what this passage is trying to do, introducing here, is this idea of universal object, where you can have this object, you can share across multiple applications, and this kind of object can have a consistent representation, but dynamic behaviors adapted to different applications. And that is about documents analysis. And now, lastly, I want to talk about documents management. A lot of people think documents management tools has been perfect. There's nothing we can do about it. And here's a tweet I found in the Twitter. For example, Casper was actually asking what's the strategy and tactics and strategy to manage Google Doc. He said, I have what feels like hundreds of documents floating around, all confusingly named, disorganized, without relevant interconnections. What to do? And if I want to tell you that Casper is actually a computer science professor in Copenhagen University, so he still struggles with documents management. So, but we follow our lead extreme user methodology. Who's the extreme user of file management? I think another tweet just probably give us an answer. Here's a tweet from Stanford University talking about the professor's desk, office. You can see here you get a lot of paper, documents, and post-it notes. I think one of the things about professors, scientists, why they are making them extreme case of document management is that you have to always keep track of the research project for a longer period of time and sometimes multiple projects across multiple people. So we start our process by first do some semi-structured interview with scientists trying to understand what's the common issues with documents management. We conduct a design workshop with our teams here to brainstorm some ideas, and later on we take those ideas into a proof of concept prototype. So I conduct 12 interviews with scientists, and here's how I know Saha. And we analyze our data here use thematic analysis. And the key findings is that scientists take advantage of a different characteristic of different type of artifact to manage their information. So what do I mean by this? Let me break it down here. So first, they use paper as thinking and reasoning tool. They move it around and navigate and write it different graphically. And they use whiteboard for discussion with their colleagues for collaborative work. And they use paper notebook to keep track of the project progress. And the key results here is that those information are distributed into different artifacts, but they're actually connected. So here's an example of one of the computational biologists. He's a biologist. So what he does, he showed me this picture, is he will analyze his data using computer analytical tools, and he will print it. Once he has this graph, he will print it out a graph and put into his his notebook. And in his notebook, he doesn't only take this graph, he also will note down the location of the data where generate this graph, the Python script generates the plots, and location of a related Jupyter notebook. He uses both in using Python and the notebook, and even the name and location of the graph where it's located in his digital folder. So here's a diagram really trying to see this workflow and how some problems here. So computational scientists first analyze their data using Python Jupyter Notebook or spreadsheets, and once they've done analysis, the results of analysis is usually in the form of a graph. So they will save this graph in their folder, but as soon as they want to share with their colleagues, they will put this graph into presentation software like a Word or a PowerPoint and to share with their colleagues. That's all good. But what happens is that when the colleague gives them feedback, say, okay, and now I want to change this. The first thing is they look at the graph and need to figure out, okay, where is the source file? So how I generate this. And once you just find the source file, you need to figure out, okay, should I create a new version, or should I make the existing version? Should I overwrite another version? They have to manage different versions. And after they manage the versions, they also have to manage different formats. Should I export in the PNG, JPG, another different, depends on the use. And after that, you also, and later on, copy paste this into different presentation software. So this is really have to be this kind of manual synchronization problems. So with all these problems identified, and we conduct a design workshop with our colleagues here, and I have to say our group is really creative, and we have some really creative ideas here, and trying to categorize them a little bit ideas. So two categories. First, the file level, and which focus on the file managers everyone have to use. Second is documents level, which more focus on specific applications. And we decided to work on the file level because it offers more generic interaction. Everyone have a file system, but also because of technical constraints, like I don't really work for Microsoft. I mean, maybe we can talk about this with Ken afterwards. So after that, we bring all these ideas together and trying to refine them. Here's a lot of sketch. We even did some story prototype, storyboard. And with all this, I would like to show you Fireweaver. So the concept of Fireweaver is very, very simple. It's to represent the hidden dependencies among files. For example, you have all these files on your folder, but you don't know the relationship around them. So what we do is actually we just show this relationship. Once you show this relationship, you are able to learn from it, to understand it, and to have a better knowledge about your files. And here's a summary of some of the Fireweaver features, but it's more than that. That's a basic concept. Some of the Fireweaver features and how we solve some of the issues. The first is that once they have this graph, they need to find the source file. This is distributed information, and they have to do this manual synchronization process. So FileWeaver does is that we're trying to visualize all the file relationships, and then we automatically update all the graphs. So I can show you an example here. So here our user can add the file to the FileWeaver, which is on the right side. And he can add all the related file linked to that file, and it appears in the graph view here. She can also add a Python script to the FileWeaver. And the FileWeaver will automatically run the script and add the generated files. Here, for example, she wants to edit his LaTeX file, add a new figure. And it's pumped for commit message here. And FileWeaver will automatically update all dependency file and opens the result in PDF. New figure has been added. She can also do the same thing for the Python script. She can edit the script. For example, right now she wants to change the script to another different color for the plot. And as you can see, FileWeaver will automatically do that and open the PDF. And second thing is that to manage different file format like PNG, JPG, and we try to abstract those file format into kind of a generic file into a single entity. So for example here, our user Jan opens a folder of the image file, and she saw there's 4 variations. As you can see, JPG to PDF, PNG, SVG, and then she can morph them into a morph file, as we see here. And you can see the graph view connects the variation with blue lines, and she can also collapse the morph to simplify the graph and reduce clutter. And she calls the morph on the Beamer file, and FileWeaver will automatically calls the preferred extension. But of course, if you want to check which extension you actually use, you can expanding the morph and to see which one is actually be used. And once we have this relationship between files, and sharing becomes very easy. So to share different related files, I can just directly to say I want to share related files, and system will automatically collect all the files and bundle it together so you can share with your colleagues. So what do we have learned about representations here? I always come back to here. Here, one of the representation, I think the powerful thing about representation is it's able to represent something invisible and make it visible. And by making it visible, user is able to learn first to see it, and then to learn about it and to understand it. And that's really the power of FileWeaver. And Zero Star, back to Zero Star, they also mentioned this principle. They say the display screen relieves the load on the short-term memory by acting as a sort of a visual cache. So that's about the last story about document management. But if you look at all these stories, there are some common underlying principles and knowledge I think we can reuse and to create in the future to create more effective new representations. And here I want to talk about this knowledge for design principles. And here are 3 of them: granularity, individuality, and synchronization. Granularity refers to the representation we're creating should be adapted to granularity of user's object of interest. There's 2 actual levels of granularity here: granularity of material and granularity of scale. And granularity of material refers to the material actually consists of that representation. For example, I have this digital number as an 8, but in the digital world, 8 can be represented in different materials. It can represent as a pixel, as a paint, as a shape, and even binary. And one of the power of digital representation is it allows you to dynamically switch between different representation for your task at hand. A write large is a great example for this. So write larges allow you to change different representation of the table and for your different tasks. For example, here you can change to stroke level, or change back to stroke level, and you can use your pen to erase some of the lines here. And this will be, if you change it back to the table level, it will automatically recognize them and think it as a merge kind of command. So what happens here is have 3 different levels of granularity materials: the stroke, the table, and the point. And another granularity is called granularity of scale. This refers to the size of the elements in that representation. Here's an example of this. And in this example, Move On, this is a tool that helps dancers learn the specific movement to learn how to dance. And with Move On, you are able to actually create this segments or clips of the video. And instead of a whole timeline, to able to, the idea is that based on their user research, they said when the dancer learns a specific movement, their object interest is really focused on this specific segment instead of a whole video. So that's why we created finer representation, have finer granularity scales to help them. So if you look at the three representations we created in the thesis, texts, and it's pretty obvious texts and passages, we are really focusing on this finer granularity scales, because what I observed is when they are doing, users doing text documents editing and documents analysis tasks, they are really focused on the snippets information instead of the whole document. So that's why we create some representations beyond the traditional desktop representation. But Fireweaver have a different story. Fireweaver will actually create a coarse granularity scale, because what we observed is that when the user is talking about the results of the experiments, he's not referring to the different variation, different formats of file. He's referring to the semantic content of that results. So so we create this kind of more file, allows them to manage them as single entity, just as they think of. A second one is called individuality. So one of the power of a digital computer is allows you to apply the command to a group of objects. And but individuality said, on top of all that, we should also support the ability to interact with individual and subgroup of objects. So here's an example in the creativity support tools to create an animation. Here's all the steams from the top. And in order to change the motion of the steam, I can apply the command to this example object. As you can see, the rest of the object will be changed because the changes have been aggregated to the rest of the group of objects. But instead of, unlike the focus on creativity and expressivity in those creativity tools, we think knowledge work actually requires accuracy and consistency. What do you mean by this? So with texts, we're actually giving more power over the individual, more power to the user over the individual objects that they can manipulate with direct replacement and individual undo, for example. And with passages, instead of dragging the passages one by one, we can drag the group of passages directly at once into the table. However, one of the improvements we could do is we allows them to also apply the subgroup of the passages into the table. And Fireweaver as well, if you want, you can span the morph to interact with individual files. The last one is sort of synchronization. So this one is very simple. It means the new representation you are creating should be always synchronized with the existing representations. And the idea for this is that if both representations is representing the same underlying information, if any changes to that information should be reflected accordingly to those representations as well. I give you an example of my overleaf editor. Here's my overleaf editor, LaTeX editor. And there's two representations for my documents that we're trying to create. The plain text file on the left, and the output PDF on the right. And LaTeX actually allows me to jump back and forth and to navigate to corresponding part of the text by interacting this button. So I can jump back from the plain text file to the PDF, and from PDF back to the location of the corresponding text here. But however, even the text selection is still not synchronized. So it's quite obvious that TextList and Fireweaver has been synchronized with their existing files, but passages have unique challenges. So there's actually two levels of synchronization for passages: the passage itself and the side panel. For the passage itself, it's synchronized, but the side panels are not. Because the side panel, at the very beginning, we thought it's application specific. But this actually caused some kind of inconsistency and lack single truth. And if you follow the principle of synchronization, one of the improvements we could do is actually synchronize all the side panels but preserve the structure for a specific application. Or just reduce the side panel to one and make it work with different applications. So here we have, we will conclude all the three design principles. And with that, I hope you get a better idea of what my thesis is about. I'm just gonna.
You should have had a slide with applause.
Is it remote jury gonna ask question first or?
No, don't.
Oh yeah.
No,
Okay, let me just move to.
So thank you very much for your presentation. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, ready?
I think so. Just a second, and we're gonna manage the camera here.
So I realized that I haven't introduced myself at the beginning for the remote participants. So I'm Sarah Cohen-Boulakia, and I'm a professor of computer science in this University of Paris-Saclay. So it's my pleasure now to have the question with Jim Olam, who is professor at the University of California, San Diego. So please go ahead with all the questions you may have.
Well, I have a lot of questions, but I think it's a very nice thesis, and you know, it's very well written. It's very clear. I think you do a really nice job in the thesis of tying in appropriate research, you know, and you make a lot of the same decisions I would have about what to refer to. So I like that a lot, and I think you make some really interesting contributions about representation. You know, building some prototypes to try out things and bringing some empirical evidence to, and then this final thing of trying to abstract out and talk about the theoretical things are very nice. I have a lot of specific questions, but one sort of general question I have that might be useful to talk about a bit is the you know, in almost every thesis I've ever read, in almost every paper I've ever read, there's a concluding little section about future work. And it's usually very short, because people are sort of tired by that time. But I think right now you're at a stage where you could, maybe one of the bigger contributions could be a reflecting back on the work and thinking about, you know, what kind of future work could be done. You know, along the way when you're doing a project like this, all kinds of interesting ideas come up and problems, and you take one path through that, but you don't talk about the path and the things not explored. And so my sort of general question is thinking about, you know, all of these things at sort of the representational level, with all of these sort of nice kinds of representation of textlets and passages, and sort of making use of this meta information about the history. You know, are there questions or ideas that came up? I mean, the people that read theses are sometimes it's your committee, but oftentimes it's other students, you know, who are looking for research topics and stuff. And so, so maybe with all of these things, if you could talk a little bit about, you know, what are the things that you would have pursued if you had more time? You know, what are issues that you see as really general and sort of, you know, Buxton talks about these phases of research of there being sort of a, you know, prospecting stage of sort of looking for things, and then a sort of mining phase of that, and then a perfecting, you know, kind of thing, and then goldsmithing and making it, you know, even more valuable. But are there things along the way that you're sort of in a position now to you know, to sort of say why this is a nice vein to mine, you know? And I think it's really refreshing that the field sort of started by looking at editing in the beginning, and it's sort of refreshing to be able to go back and say, well, gee, there's a lot of things that are interesting and can be done, rather than, you know, Microsoft Word solve them and stuff. So I mean, if that.
Okay, just a lot of questions I'm trying to catch. I think one of the things, if any PhD student can read my thesis, I think one of the message I want to give it to them is documents can be sexy. I mean, there's a lot of interesting things you can still do with it if you have some. It's really actually very fundamental, and but there's some future work I really like to do. There's two, I think. First is that this thesis really focused on text and not so much about graphics and videos, even these multimedias, and which is really actually another power of the computers and digital media was trying to bring them some animations and sort of stuff. But I think some of the principles like the refining of the selection, some kind of stuff can really apply to more those kind of medias like the images or graphics and even, for example, I know creating mood board, for example, you are collecting a lot of stuff and moving it and trying to make sense of it and that kind of information. That's one part I think go beyond the text, which is focused on this one. But I think it's very important ones. I've been thinking about this. And second one is the whole thesis really about extreme users, lead users. That's why I was trying to figure out. I have some slides here, but I will show maybe probably afterwards. Is that, but we haven't really tested out. We're trying to do some preliminary lab study to see if this one can be more general to other people. Other people will find it useful as well. How other people will appreciate the things which has been designed primarily for this kind of group of users, and how those kind of extreme needs can be actually generated to a larger population. So that was a part I was really interested in, want to pursue, and or want to pursue with that. And specifically, if there's one very short term, so those are a little bit long term. So if you look at the things, we have a long term future plan, short term future plan. Short term plan is actually the Fire River project, for example. We haven't done any evaluation for this, and our YouTube video on the YouTube have like more than 1,000 views. I think is probably people could find this kind of small tool very useful to help manage their files. But what I really wanted to see for the short term is to see how we can actually make the prototype more robust and deploy it a little bit, and to see what people will use it. And we have been working on, I mean, this is one of the future guys going to work on this. But yeah, I think that's several directions I've been thinking about.
Yeah, I mean, in your last little chapter, you talk about this extending it to everyday users and stuff, and you talk about looking at AI and more adaptive, kinds of things.
The AI thing is very interesting. You mentioned this because one of the quotes I mentioned, they have this tool that automatically generates a report. At the very beginning, this guy showed me the tool. I was like, wow, okay, like, well, there's no use for me. Why I'm here? You already solved this problem. But we're really talking to them. Those examiners really have mixed feelings. So about those kind of very automated tools, because kind of take away of their control over their text. And if you really dive into deep of what they are trying to do, it's a human-to-human game. It's not a human-to-computer game. They're trying to convince each other, and it's like doing the business a little bit like that, So of course, it's a game play on words, and that's another thing. So I think it's really this kind of extreme case really gives some example of how to say. I lost my thoughts here. How the importance of the humans in this AI thing. I think I want to explore even further, on this topic.
Yeah, maybe just another really brief question. I mean, I think you do a really valuable thing is sort of abstracting things, that you do into these principles and granularity and et cetera. I don't know exactly how to ask this, but a really incredible thing about like ASCII representation is it doesn't really constrain the tools I use. So you can edit the ASCII in Emacs and VI or whatever. Do you see that like some of these kind of representational things, if you had the right representation, could it move, beyond tools that were designed specifically for it?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, one of the things, if I think about representation, I mean, just example of table, you can actually I guess your representation have different levels, right? You have different ones, and
Yeah.
and one of the thing is if you go to fundamental level, which is like ASCII code or code stuff,
Right.
and because actually I don't know, I'm trying to be careful if I want to say this is abstraction, to focus on different representation, or just want to talk about different representations. They are, but what I'm trying to say is like, what's the information they are actually, those things are representing for? Because why are people doing here? Like, what's the thing, essentially thing they want to do, which is related to conceptual model of the user. For example, I have a user here was interacting with different representations. And I think the thing is, I don't find, maybe there's a best representation for specific tasks, but I think really the power was, because for my empirical study, what I learned is that people's activities not just as we thought, okay, they're only, if I tell you, this guy's writing or is writing a book, and you're imagining, you think, okay, he has this blank page, he was typing, but writing is not typing, it's different. When you really look at the writing, you are going, for example, one of the researchers said you read a lot, so you have to read to know how to write, and then when maybe you'll do the mind map or sort of stuff, it's very messy. So, but stereotypically, when you think about writing, and you directly think, oh yeah, just people, you just need to give people a typewriter, a keyboard, and they can do this. So I think by jumping into this kind of rich empirical, you can see the connection of different activities, and by different activity, maybe there's a representation for activity, but if they're connected, I think the really power of is to leverage this kind of a multi-representations and be able to give the users a way to see that, because each representation gives a different angle to see the things differently and to understand differently, to get different ideas, and I think that's essentially what I have learned from this. And I don't know if it's really answering your question.
No, but it was good. One final, if I have time for one more. My own thought of a really valuable direction for future research is if you compare the facilities we have for like editing and writing documents with programming environments, and working on code where we can, branch and consider alternatives and do all of that. It seems like a really rich thing for research, and maybe for reintroducing this interest in, editing and stuff. If you had the equivalent power that we have for programming and writing, and I think a lot of what you're doing is sort of moving up this abstraction, looking at what people really do, rather than it's entering characters in the editor. It's really that I'm processing this in some ways, and what you've built are some little steps forward to help with those, with countlets and et cetera. But maybe taking seriously the real job of intellectual activity of writing, and trying to support it, in the same way that we've, I think, taken very seriously programming. And now when people write, if you want to change a paragraph, you often copy it, put it down at the end of the buffer, because there's like no support. You can't go back otherwise, and you can't do that. And it just seems like a really rich direction that could pay off immensely, if you could really aid the writing process.
Yeah, I think the coding, I mean, this is from actually show where actually from the Texas project, I look at other literature on code, because the reason the documents, the contract is kind of structured, more structured than blogs or other kind of things you are trying to write. And there's really a lot of things has done on coding tools and tools for support coding instead of writing. But my hypothesis here is that people who are able to develop things, developers, they code and they can develop building tool for themselves, and they are willing to build tools themselves. So they have a lot of research on that. But writing, yeah, it's true. One of the things I was very beginning dive into the writing thing is that you really have to. I was thought of thinking about conduct some really how to say observational studies. Really figure out, okay, write this piece of thing and really go into details of why you write this. And because I think there's really a lot of things happening in your mind, and which is not and which is not actually you don't really get it, or they don't even realize there's something happening in your mind. I think.
Yeah, but one could say that maybe the way that programming tools are so much better is programmers understand programming. They sort of understand the task, but people building a design tool don't. And I think what you show is by looking closely at the task, you can build tools to support that.
There's one more difference I want to add a little bit about coding and writing here. So I have this story that during my midterm evaluation, I have another tutor, Jean-Daniel Fekete, and he asked me, he said, "What is a document?" And I said, "Okay, I don't know." But later, after I finished the thesis, I met him on a train. I said, I probably have an answer for you. You want to hear about it? And he said, "Okay, go ahead." So I told him my answer. So one of the answers in my documents is really focused on this communication, because no one will write documents just for the sake of writing. Of course, you can practice maybe your typing speed, but and the code is to, if you think about, because read and write is two different essential activity towards any object here. In general, I mean read and write in general. And when you write something, I mean coding, you actually, if you look at the definition of coding, you are giving instruction to the computer to understand, to execute it. And in that sense, I think it's more, and so for a lot of coders, you have to understand how computer works in a sense. So, I think a lot of great writers will really look at how they're trying to always have to, so for example, I have the thing I created, I'll have a read and write. When you're actually writing it, you almost have to imagine, okay, what are people, when they read it, what's the kind of information we're trying to get? Because there's an interpretation process. And I think from that angle, think about it as a communication activity, about reading code and writing text could also be kind of interesting to look at. I mean, just some of my thoughts. I'll be
but I think one way of viewing programming is you're designing a language to be able to say what you want to say, things, and I think writing is the same way. I mean, there's this famous phrase that programs should be written to be read and only incidentally executed. That if you think about that, what you're doing is describing a process for another person reading it. I think there's more parallels there.
I see.
But anyway, sorry to take so much time.
No, it's perfect. So thank you very much. So now we continue with Yannick Prier, who is professor at the University of Nantes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that's the end of the day. Sorry, inviting me to this jury, and thank you for this nice and enthusiastic presentation. Maybe a few words about the document that I had to examine. I think it's very good, but maybe at some point I missed some annexes about mostly about the experiments or the.
Okay.
Because at some point I think the reader would like to have more details about about the experiments. But all in all, I think you did a lot of things about this field study, design, programming, and seeing what it gives, giving some empirical results. So that's very nice. And I do think that at the end you really propose things that actually challenge taken for granted representation, and you really propose things that could enhance or put, let's text management or document management to the next level. For the principle, I made some remarks in the comments, and maybe my main remark is about granularity, because I would like, and that would be maybe a first short question, which is, it seems to me that granularity is designed, this principle is about manipulating the same type of object. It's kind of polymorphism applied to the same types of objects, while polymorphism is about objects that can be different, that are similar to one extent, but that can also be different. And it seems to me that in your proposal, you really focus on objects of the same type. So what would be granularity with different objects?
Individuality or granularity for different objects?
No, granularity.
For different objects?
No, not granularity. The second principle.
Individuality.
Individuality.
For different type of object. Do you have any specific use case in mind that, or just the general principle?
Because polymorphism, as described by Michel, is about different types of objects and implying instruments on different types of objects.
I see. Okay. I think the first thing is I try to not step on the toe of Michel. But I do think it's very important. I mean, if we combine, so I was more talking about combine. So basically, polymorphism was talking about apply to different type of object. And now individuality don't talk about subgroup of object, but how about the group actually have different types and how you can apply different things. And I think it's on the abstract level. I haven't. That's why I'm asking for more specific examples. I'm trying to figure out. I think there's another thing because the different types. One of the categorization you can do on this group of objects. I'm just going to write down here to help me. So let's imagine. Let's give a simple example, right? I have some circles and I have some stuff, right? And then actually we have this and we have this. If you look at this group of objects, and well, first thing you talk about different types, and type depends on how you talk about types. If you type of the shape, those things are the same group, right? Those things are the same group. But if you using a different criteria, if you think about a shade, actually those things are the same group, and those things are the same group. So I think when you come to this, it's really based on, they come to the point about what's the attributes of the object. That's another concept that probably I haven't touched on. Because when you apply, for example, to an individual one, right now I think the individuality means regardless of types, regardless what kind of things you're applying. But of course, the subgroup might allow you to change different attributes in able to create different groups. So, but what I mean by this, I would say, is that, for example, if you have two attributes, you say, I want to create a subgroup by different types. And then I was able to grab those two circles and one column and one like this. If I want to say I want to introduce, this is one categorization, another categorization will be this, this, and this, right? So, and so that's really, I think one of the way we can do it is with a little bit like mathematical modeling about this, because actually it can overlap some more. Anyways, but still, I just want to point out maybe there's something when you talk about an object, there's one fundamental element is the attributes of the object, which kind of set the criteria about how you can understand this object, I think.
So you're more in a model where you would have objects defined by their properties, or a sort of tag model, or properties that could be attached to various
different attributes and properties, yeah.
Thank you. I have a curiosity question about your experiment with Textlet, I guess.
Yeah.
Because you say, if I read well, that you used Think Aloud during a task of reading articles.
Oh, you know, passages.
Passages, sorry. Reading articles, extracting passages, organizing them, etc.
Yeah.
And so I guess it was long.
It was long, 2 hours.
So how did you get people to do Think Aloud during 2 hours?
You give them chocolate. No.
How did you manage to carry for people to carry on?
I see what you mean. Yeah.
The thinking aloud.
That's a good question. I mean, yeah, it's true they tend to speak less afterwards, you know. But then you get tired, and like, so you're trying to, I guess, encourage them to say, okay, I saw you doing this, you know, why you are doing this, that kind of thing. And sometimes we even break the system apart because our measure doesn't count the time and that kind of thing. So we give them a 5 minutes break between. You say, okay, I'm a little bit tired, I want to take a break. So have a little bit joke session and bring a little bit laughter, and then come back to it, I think. Because when you do the thing is, when you do, no matter interviews or observations, whatever, you are interacting with people, you can get a sense of their your tiredness or whatever, so you can adjust that kind of thing. Of course, with the constraint of the protocol. But so we're really trying to reduce it. I mean, actually, when we design at first, that's a path we didn't take. Is that we have 5 documents we have to compare, and that takes a lot of time for them to figure out. And the document is a whole document, it's like 10 pages. So like, it's not possible. So we're trying to reduce what we give it to them. It's just three documents for one task. But we already selected the part based on the criteria and gave it to them, trying to reduce that amount of time. But in the end, it still takes around 2 hours. So yeah, so we're really trying to do that. But so here's a trade-off between research rigor and the time it takes. I think it's yeah. So that's how I try to manage it.
But that's interesting. You could write a paper with the title 2 hours think aloud works, and that's how you do that. Okay, a question I asked in the report as well is about passages and Ted Nelson.
Oh yeah.
And transclusion.
Yeah.
Because the whole hypertext proposal of Ted Nelson was about transclusion, which is the fact that you reuse passages of text in various documents, and he had the idea that you could also sell a part of a document that could be reused. So it reminded me a lot about transclusion, but you don't mention it. So what's your thought about transclusion in that context?
I see. I mentioned, I think I showed one of the demo. I saw one of the demos. I'm just going to draw because I remember the interface basically. He would give a demo, Sharadu. What's the name of the Sharadu? And he has this thing. This is the main documents, and through the main documents you have different companion documents, and you have this. He has this 3D interface, and you can see the connection between different documents, that kind of stuff. You can navigate through this thing. I think the first time for me it looks really complicated and to really work on this, but yeah, I think the transclusion definitely. I'm not seeing the. I think while watching this video, the first impression was like, yeah, this guy has already had my idea. You know, I done the thing, 20 years ago. But what really happens is that the key thing about these passages is really trying to see how we can work with different applications. Not only for reading tasks, because this one focus on reading tasks and see the different relationships. And we'll leverage this kind of I think there's a lot of work done with like a file browsing. You can trace bound different things and browsers as well. Well, Ted Nelson definitely he invented this hyperlink. So and he actually, I think I have a thing he talked about the meta documents. Because when Facebook came out and he has a meta-doc, I find it funny. Anyways, it's because the meta-doc thing can connect different things. Yeah, so basically that's my my thing about he really trying to see the connections between, and he was using example as Bible. I think in that video he was using example Bible, which have a lot of references for sure. And I don't know what happened to that project. It didn't carry on with this kind of spatial 3D interface. I mean, if you talk with Michel about 3D interface, he will tell you essentially what 2D animals, and we don't understand 3D. It's a bit complicated, but anyways. And yeah, so I know that work, and I can probably give more acknowledgement and talk more about it in your thesis.
Okay, thank you. People have been writing and creating documents for a long time.
Oh, yeah.
So documents and text are resisting.
Yeah.
They have been in humanity for several millennia, and so that's kind of natural to me that you cannot change a lot what documents are, because it's so ingrained in what we are. That's kind of difficult. And that's just a remark, but I wanted your thoughts about the document-centered approach of Apple. I guess in the
open doc, you mean?
Document-centered approach. I guess in the 90s, they decided that you didn't manage files anymore, but you did manage documents. And until maybe 2 years ago, you could still see some principle of that in your application on a Mac. For instance, you couldn't really do on some files save as. Save as was forbidden.
Okay.
Because that was because 20 years ago somebody make a radical choice. But now, while reading your thesis, I say, okay, save as is now back, and they failed to arrive to this document-centered approach.
Okay.
So my question is, why did they fail to transform people to go from file to documents? Yeah.
So in this specific example of save as, or because I know they have this open doc thing, and which is more like compound documents instead. But you're talking about the
fact that in front of you have a document.
Yeah.
And you cannot, and they don't want you to see it as a file. They
okay.
want it. They want you to see it as a document that's saved somewhere, but you don't have to care about it.
Okay. I see. I think on that case, actually, we talk about this. I think the Word document, for example, if you open it, it's actually a zip file with all the different images as a saved simple image, and it just composed together. I think the Word, if you save it as a zip instead of Word as an extension. Okay. Anyways, I didn't know that work and save as. I still don't understand what save as does. Like at this point, is a save as to a new copy, right?
Yeah.
It's a new copy. Why don't you? Save as, actually 3 dots means save as
or
as
save
a new
as
copy.
As a new copy, or save as.
Okay.
With a new name.
Okay. Your question is.
What is your thought about this? Because this is really about document. This is really about manipulating files or documents or both at the same time.
Yeah, true.
And I think it's related to file weaver, because at some point you manipulate the files, and then you have this image file, and at some point you have this file that is representing more the image. Well, I saw it in your presentation. You said that there's a GIF-C file. But you said it's not a file. This is a document.
True. I understand.
So this is exactly this.
I think here's the thing is, what I understand, the Macs trying at their time to try. I think my understanding is that trying to accommodate different expertise, and because for their personal I remember Steve Jobs said this computer can be used by near morons or something like that. They have no idea about this. They can still use it, But on the other hand, Mac actually, I think, has been. I saw this video actually. If you're editing kind of the documents, you can see the backgrounds. Similar to our file weaver, you can see what file has been actually being changed, because. So that can be actually. It's another tweet, but anyways, I think. So my answer is they're trying to accommodate different user expertise in that sense, or to create, like the application as well. And I was thinking about another one, which is application. You can also open it as a folder instead of an application anymore on the Mac. There's another things about that. So that would be my actually the answer for this. And save as, I think they create a simpler conceptual model, because I mean the file weaver.
Maybe it was simpler, but at the end of the day, people wanted save as.
Yeah, exactly. So because in it, you to getting the understanding the relationship between object, it's kind of hard. I mean, in the sense this is one. So for example, I do save as, and maybe I will put version 1, version 2, version 3, that kind of extension on the names. And even though that's creating some problems, but at the very beginning, when you are doing the save as, probably because they don't have another thing. If you don't do save as, what's your your previous version wouldn't be there, and we just override it in a sense. And also, there's another feature I want to mention is actually I think I used it. They have this time machine for example, on the keynotes, and every time you save, they will save the copy. So you are able to bring all of the copies of that, and I think maybe that could be another way to manage a save as. If I only talk about save as.
That's a reminiscences of this global approach and this global
embedded into the object itself.
In the 90s.
Yeah.
Okay, that's about this reification of object of thought.
Sure.
Because it seems to me that you can reify in a lot of ways. You can verify, let's say, functionalities, and that's the way somehow applications evolve. You add new functions that correspond, that help, for instance, take Photoshop or graphical tools. You see what people are doing, and then you invent objects, new objects, and new tools to help them do that. But then it's more and more complicated. You can add a lot of commands to Word and so etc. Or you can have verification of things that would be multi-app. That would be your passages, for instance, and this is difficult. And maybe this trans-app object of instruments would be related to mostly to human cognition of information objects, and that's more on the human side. That's less on the application side and more on the human side. And you can try also to have this universal object of interest. You mentioned the term, but you don't really elaborate on this this universal objects, which you define as objects that have that are continuous object of interest. And then you're more, let's say, on the activity side. That's more on the temporality of the user, and you maintain these objects throughout your activity. And this was something we discussed with Tim this morning. But my question would be, there are 3 types of verifications. How do you decide which type of what are the best verifications? What are the most fruitful, and it's related to future work? And also, how do you decide what kind of verification you should do? More on the application side, more on the multi-app and the human side, or the human activity side?
Okay, just to summarize, the 3 verification you were talking about are function, app, and object. From my understanding, if I
multi-app instruments.
Multi-app instruments, okay.
And objects of interest for one user in her activity.
I'm trying to write it down. Multi-app. And
functions. Evolution of an app.
Evolution of the app. Okay, now I got it. Okay.
And object related to an activity. So something I carry on with my activity.
Okay. So
are you agreeing with that? And then
okay, sure. Yeah. So the multi-app thing, that was it's interesting. You were talking about evolution of the app. What do you mean by multi-app, by the way? See, the multi-app is that we have multiple apps. The fact.
Yeah, but there's a passage.
Oh yeah, but this one also with the object related to activities. Is kind of similar. Or?
Yeah, but that's not a generic object. Passage is a generic object that is related to a text. For instance, while in my activity I could need an object that is really related to my writing this paper and not generally writing paper.
Okay, I see. I'm trying to tease out different parts here. So we have object, and you have applications,
and activities.
And activities. So those are the 3 key concepts of what I'm trying to say. Okay. The thing about applications, I always think about. So first thing about applications.
But my question is really about when do you verify, and when do you say it's not worth verifying because that's really particular to the user or particular to this specific activity. You can add a lot of functions to any tool, but at the end you will have thousands of functions.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
And the tool won't be usable anymore.
Okay, I see what you mean.
When do you stop? When you decide it's okay or not?
That's can I take on? I mean, I take on because apps are mostly a lot of industrial partners, industrial people actually apps. I think this is a question you were handling a lot, and about have the request should I add it to a thing. For example, the evolution of the apps. I think when I talk about this, I think every decision you make about the features adding to the apps, it's coming to the point about conceptual model of the user's conceptual model of the system. What's the system? What's this app or what's whatever like this kind of thing? was trying to do, and what is the key, how the users will understand how you can use this app for. And I was talking to Han actually the other day. If you think about a car right now, the primary functionality of the car is to drive me from here to here, from place A to a place B. But right now, people are trying to make an app like a robot, right? I have different musical player, I have different who can directly order the takeaway when I arrive home, or directly cooked, everything connected to the Internet of Things, for example. But I think a lot of these, if we agree, simplicity is good for design. Simplicity, okay. Simple, yeah. I think one of the things is to really, when you think about different features to add to the app, is really trying to figure out, does these features enhance the conceptual model to make it simple, or gonna make it complicated? And does it help the people to achieve what is the core thing you want to use this to achieve, or it's actually making it more maybe for business reasons, maybe competitor was doing this, maybe I was doing that. I think it's all related to the conceptual model of the system. For example, what I mean by this, right? I give you an example of Keynotes, PowerPoint software. There's a simple conceptual here. Basically, I have to put object in my slides. I was able to edit the object, and I have to change the slides. So slides, object, those kind of a key concept. And I think once you're trying to really keep this concept as simple as possible, and when every time you decide something, you need to see if you're adding a more object. So basically what I'm talking about is really just a conceptual model of the system. I think I'm trying to keep that as an app evolving, but the conceptual model should not as evolving, as complex as app evolving. You see what I'm saying? I don't know if it makes sense. Anyways, yeah, and then I was talking about activity, of course. And also another question I was asking myself as well is that how you decide making another app instead of making a gigantic app combine two apps, right? Like what's the design things here? And I think the conceptual model is going to help with here. And also, that's why of course I'm an advocate for the activity-centric approach, gives the power to the user, that we can all develop these apps, and we can have kind of a space for the users to leverage those apps. Because when you develop the app, of course, sometimes you have to solve the problem for the customer, for the users or whatever. But a lot of time, I think they also have to have some business constraints. Like we have to make money and have to download this sort of stuff. So developers of the app, because there's a different peoples here. You have developers who develop this app, and you have users here. I think there's some battles around here. But of course, we are thinking about users. So I think when you I think that's the first question. If I prefer all those kind of reifications, I would say the activity way simple, because the thing about interactive the passages is I'm not trying to, the key concept is not trying to create another app which combine all of the things together.
But at the end,
but
you kind of need to create an app for all the passages.
Yeah,
to be synchronized. So.
Yeah, the thing is, because it's a proof of concept in a sense. I mean, if I'm able to sit on this stage with CEO of Apple, CEO of Microsoft, maybe we can make some decisions and make about this. But I think the web is also the place actually is a more, how to say, I would say more open, organic place for these kind of things. And another question you mentioned is that you mentioned if the one problem user have, should I make sure that the other people you also have the same problem? No, it's not your problem. It's not your question. Okay. All right.
Okay, I'm finishing. And is this conceptual model a substrate? That's a tricky question. You're not obliged to answer.
I think the definition of conceptual model is the user's understanding of the system, right? I think, which is different than mental model I discussed with Michelle here. Substrates, it's a concept. To me, my personal opinion about substrates, even I haven't talked with Michelle about a lot. It's really the environment, the objects is in. An app could be but it's not exactly the environment. So your question is conceptual model
and the
substrates.
Model you are talking about is Can it be considered
I think substrate is part of the conceptual model probably, but it's more from, I think conceptual model really from the design perspective, but substrate is more from, could also add a little bit designer's perspective about how we design those things. And of course, okay, any system they have two parts, the user and designer. The designer trying to make the system understand by the user, right? I think substrate should add it to the conceptual model, the things, because conceptual model you get a key concept which is a conceptual object. But I think maybe another level where object lives, you could have another level called substrates, which you can't change. For example, I give my understanding of substrates, keynotes, same example. The object here is different shapes or different text. Text is still shape in the individual slides. One of the substrates, okay, maybe Michelle will disagree with me, is the slide itself, where this kind of some concept could work on, But at the same time, if you look at the upper level, the slides in the individual slides is also object, where you can manipulate it on the sidebar here, right? So I think they are jumping back and forth at different levels here. I'm not trying to get too complicated here, but so to answer your question, to summarize, I think substrate could be a useful concept adds to the user's conceptual model.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. So we will now continue with the examiner of this thesis, and we will start with Victoria Bellotti, who is a senior consumer insights researcher at Netflix.
Do I just go?
Sure.
Hi everybody, thank you for inviting me to this. It's a real honor to be an external examiner. I haven't done it very often, and I hope I've done due diligence here. I've been trying to sort of think about, why would I be invited to participate in this? And of course, Michelle and Wendy, they both know of me as a user-centered researcher, so I'm constantly thinking of, what's this thing going to be like in practice? And I've already talked to Evan, or do you prefer to go by Han?
Yeah, Han, yeah.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I worked with somebody called Han, so,
Okay.
So for me, I think it's sort of all, and I foreshadowed it in our conversations, it all boils down to the how these things would work in practice. And, the weak part of the whole thesis is the evaluation, which, in some cases is a bit spotty, or it's sort of very, I would be concerned about it, not having an independent person apply Green's principles, for example. Because I think it's very subjective if something is role expressive. It might be. These super sharp people are amazed when I show them that there is a view print option which you can turn off, printed view, so that when they're scrolling through documents and talking about things, they don't have to see this big gap between two pages. Or they're amazed that there's a heading formatting tool, and then you can apply different heading formats, to all of the headings together, right? These tools are really very obviously there in the interface. If you did a little bit of discovering, you would very quickly realize there's a lot of powerful ways to sort of control the formatting of your document or make it more usable in different situations. So it's with that lens that I then come to this, and I hear the conversation between you and the examiners talking about some rather abstract principles and concepts, which are, people are having a little bit of trouble communicating to each other. So my giant concern is, how could you communicate this to a user who can't even be bothered to apply a heading formatting? Or it's not they can't be bothered, but it's not their job to master tools that require them to think through this abstract principle of there's multiple instances of this object, and I can apply something to all of those instances, and it will save me a huge amount of time. Right? So that my question is really as twofold. Partly is what kinds of user experience sort of measures could one take to make the functionality more visible to people, more role expressive to the uninitiated? And then obviously with the future work, I think rather than veering off into AI, I actually would have kind of been more concerned about sort of saying how you could systematically sort of plug the gaps in this work and figure out what would make these tools usable in practice. So I'll stop there and let you respond.
Okay. Yeah, sure. So the first question, you're talking about actually a lot of commands in the current interface, and I think, well, one of the things they are doing in the current interface is doing by hiding like multiple levels of menus. For example, you go to a different level, and that's kind of different. And then you use some principle of progressive disclosure, which you show each step by step instead of giving all the information at the same time. But I think there's another way. What this thesis was trying to do, what I was trying to do is really to thinking about because the whole process of reunification is trying to creating objects instead into the screen and kind of thing. For example, text. Instead of all go to the, Apple have the thing you always go to the top bar menu to get your command, and so really trying to see how we can, because the goal here was to reduce number of commands, for example, or number of commands user have to learn or to discover. And one of the way I'm showing this thesis trying to do is trying to by creating some kind of a meaningful object that they can and then can associate different kind of commands into this object, and to able to reduce. This object can be in a sense more how to say, taking a lot of principles and they can work with each other. And instead of just provide, so I think it's transforming into a procedural learning into kind of a more manipulation way of focus on the object. I know that, for example, I have this bottle, I can get water, I can get that, and that kind of thing. Of course, I can also have this bottle knob object, and I can go to different commands to apply open this bottle, but I can directly open it my way, for example, like something like this. So I think, I don't know if that answers, to summarize what I said, is that with bloated command into the current interface, what they are trying to do is put into different menus and trying to maybe get users into this flow to discover them, maybe provide tutorials, whatever. But what we are trying to do is really trying to see how we can create some kind of a object into kind of interface where they can have understand this object, understand the behavior, what they can do with it, and then using this as a command to apply something, to do something with it. So it's from a command centric way, and thinking about how we can simplify that by creating an object instead. I think that's my answer to the first question. And second question, how to make it practical for the users. And I think one of the things for sure, and one of the first challenges is that you have a lot of existing tools. One of the first decisions when we create research prototype is that, okay, do I gonna add some to existing tools, or we create a new tool which is different? I think this comes to the point how we take it that user can use it, but instead of making it useful for a user. So can you elaborate more about the second question?
Yeah, the question was really about using these tools in practice in the real world, where a bunch of stuff that you may never have thought of might come up. Like I think it was for the passages work, or maybe it was FileWeaver. But everything seemed to be in the same folder, right? But in reality, things are scattered all over the place in different drives, and sometimes they don't even have access rights to it, so that sort of stuff would come up if you really apply it. So I don't mean just applying it to a single application or across applications. It's more like whatever you choose to do, how do you make sure that it fits in with the real world, where there are a lot of things you might have overlooked as possible constraints. And also, that things that you intended to be easy for people turn out not to be, that something is not actually well expressive as you thought it might be.
So the answer is testing, I think. You really have to, yeah, and which, I mean, for the time we're really lack of this because it's a research prototype, yeah. But I think really the answer is really a lot of evaluation on testing that really put into their work because I cannot anticipate it and no one can, and until the problem really comes out from them, then you will learn from it and you can adapt it. And I think that's, yeah, my answer.
Yeah, I mean, so kind of what I was looking for is, for the final section, would be to kind of elucidate what you think might be some of the risks or weaknesses, and then, you know, talk about these are the limitations that, you know, things we may have overlooked, areas we might be overlooking, things we're not sure about, and then how future work could actually go about sort of addressing some evaluation of that.
I see. Okay. One of the things I think, and of course evaluation goes step by step, a little bit incremental approach, and trying to lab study and try to figure out first, and then do some field study. And I think for me, there's another thing I'm trying to say, talking about. Sorry, I have some. Sorry, I need to write it down, but. Your risks, one of the risks, I was thinking about this, the risks, I remember now. One of the things is that I remember one of another guy, Haijun, another researcher, he also taking this object approach. And one of the things, I haven't encountered that, but one of the things he has, and one of the guy asked when he gave a Kai talk, is that if you have so many objects on your screen, okay, how you can manage that? It's a scalability problem, right? That's one of the risks here. And for sure, like if you look at if the folder where I just gave you example of FileWeaver, we just gave you some simple example of the folder, but imagine you have actually, if you look at Wendy's desktop, you have like so many files like all over, and then some of them are like 20 years ago, and that kind of thing, you know. So that's scalability and how exactly working the use case and real data. I think that's probably one of the risks, and even for just for Texas, for example, how many things they're gonna create there, and then how many occurrences are gonna appear there, you know? So that's the problem here. And yeah, so I think one of the risks is coming in my mind. I've been thinking about this, of course, and from the user point of view, like you can hide stuff. Like one of the passages we're talking about, if you exported it, you will see that we will directly import the whole quote, right? And that is actually a problem because people think about, there's a lot of quote, I cannot even edit it. Some of the mitigation was trying to make it collapsible, so you can only show that part if you needed to, but it only reply that. So, yeah, so scalability, I would say that's one of the risks, and have to really test out with user to test out their data, and yeah.
And I mean, one of the other things for me is just how intuitive this all is. So I go back to these smart people at Netflix who can't figure out paragraph formatting. You know, I figure that like most people they would never get round to mastering this stuff unless it's really, really like clearly demonstrated to them how to do it and what the benefits are. And you know, that could be some interesting. I know that, you know, in academia, I've been there, like trying to get people to use prototypes is absolutely incredibly difficult. But at least for that side of things, maybe one could use I forget what you call your approach, but sort of like present people with like a video, a mock-up of how it might be presented to somebody without explaining it to them or tutoring them, and see what is difficult for them to grasp. So if they see the tool as a tooltip or a demonstration, and then can they for themselves figure out what it does and what the benefit is.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's some that's interesting parts about new ways of evaluating this in kind of resources constraints environment. Have this video, how to pop up those kind of video. For example, I could imagine you were actually doing the thing, and when they are doing it and they're doing the one way, I can pop up the video, say, okay, we actually have this way. What do you think about this? And because first step you have to put into kind of put them into the environment that they understand what's the task, what's the context, and then you pop up with this. I think, maybe could be an interesting thing to do.
And that might be where the AI applies, is being able to observe the work, spot the pattern, and then present the solution. And if somebody keeps seeing it again and again and again, they'll eventually, get it through their head. Like right now, Google Docs should be able to spot the pattern of people making a line of text bigger and bigger and bolding it, and then figure out, they don't realize that that's a heading, and give them the tip to use the heading formatting, which then gives you more power because it turns it into a URL that can be referred to uniquely, like a deep link into the document, right? So lots of people are just not benefiting from that capability, and I've seen them put bookmarks even on headings because they don't know that headings themselves are bookmarks. So it's just like people don't grasp. They're not paying attention enough.
Yeah.
So you have to kind of put it right in front of them. This is the thing, and here's the benefit. I don't know whether we're out of time. I mean, I don't want to hog Han's time, so I could go on, or I can cede to the next examiner.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead with question if you have some others. It's up to you.
Sorry.
Well,
can you hear what she said? Yeah, right.
Or we can come back after.
Or we can come back at the end of the defense. Up to you.
Yeah. Okay, that's fine. I'll cede it to the next examiner. I'm sure they're chomping at the bit or champing at the bit.
Okay, great. Okay. So we will continue with Ken Hinsley, who is a senior principal research manager at Microsoft.
Oh, thanks. Thanks, Han, for inviting me to join your committee here. I've followed some of this work with interest over recent years. A lot of compelling and interesting ideas here. There's some. When you get to putting these things into practical world scale systems, like Victoria was hinting at, there's a lot of problems to solve, right? So but this is one thesis, right? So I'm not necessarily expecting you to solve all those problems. I mean, there's tons of things I could ask about this work. Maybe one to start with is, I've seen this theme of pieces of documents comes up over and over again in the literature, both in kind of going back to some of these now ancient analyses of what people do with paper documents that work Abbey Solomon and so forth, and the myth of the paperless office. But you see it coming forward more and more, even in the modern context where people want to be able to refer to pieces of things that they've worked with before. It might be a passage of text, it might be an image, it might be a hyperlink on some website, and there's sort of this notion of there's these pieces of information that people want to deal with, and these are sort of the information objects that actually feed into people doing their work, right? They're not typically accessing the whole document at the moment that they're actually writing something. They want to refer to something, they want to make their point. So, and you raise this, it kind of comes up in some of the user interviews you did, which were, it was a really rich and nice motivation for, a lot of your, why it's interesting to explore this stuff. But there were it felt to me like there were some opportunities where you maybe could have taken this notion of pieces of documents, even further. So for example, there is a bit of a contrast between text lists and passages, which they kind of feel like an evolution of a core concept. But then when you get to the file weaver work, now you're more talking about files as the units of action, right? Where, in principle, you could do the same kind of dependency tracking and history tracking for pieces of files as opposed to the file units themselves. And I realized that there's technical constraints here. And file weaver is kind of if you read the section of how that thing's implemented, it's just makes your brain explode, right? It's kind of amazing that it works at all. But I was just wondering if you had thoughts on how could you take this notion of pieces of documents much further? Because I really do feel like there's a lot of I guess it's more an intuition than hard evidence, but I think there's a lot of potential behind that concept to go way further than it is now. Even across single documents, across multiple applications, which you kind of hint at. I think even the same principles could be talking about an ecology of applications or an ecology of multiple devices even. So it seems like there's lots of potential there. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on taking pieces of documents further.
Yeah. So so one of the things you mentioned a little bit texts and passages would kind of share the same DNA here. It is really true. Texts focus on a single documents editing, and passage really trying to say, okay, how we can take this piece of pieces of information out of the original documents, and what people would do with it, which was used in the different applications for different tasks. And you mentioned some of the things. Once you take it out, there's different dimensions. I think it usually goes to. You have devices, you have applications, you have people, you have different users, right? And I guess one of the things is one of different devices. I mean, right now we talk about this a lot. For example, I just see today when I want to share a link to my friends, which is in my WhatsApp, but my link was created in my email. So what I would do is I will send it to my I log into the WhatsApp on my app and send it there. So this kind of I think it's, in this kind of scenario, it's actually cross both apps and devices at the same time. And of course, apps are trying to create their different versions for different devices. So I think that's probably interesting. And another part, we touch a little bit upon on this, is to share by for different users and to see how they can, because the document you created with passages, your readers is able to get access to it as well, to read it. And because we think writing and reading really goes hand by hand and support this kind of a cycle instead of just one go process. And yeah, so those are the three kind of dimensions that we're thinking about when you take a piece of in documents out, and how you can continue to exist in this world where you have people, you have application and devices coming into it.
Okay, thanks for that. I mean, yeah, I guess one other dimension is time as well, right? Like history and the file weaver.
Yeah, true.
Yeah. So maybe another topic. Yeah, you talk a lot about representations in the thesis, which is a concept I love, and also feels like it's something that it's been talked about for a couple of decades now, like really going back to Michel's work. I think I see as the real root of a lot of that. But on the other hand, it feels like it hasn't fully caught on yet. I mean, there's been some explorations. There's Haijun Zhao's work is awesome. I felt like I was just lucky to collaborate with him with some of that, right? So I don't take any of the credit for those kind of concepts. But there is this notion when you have these representations, there's certain like one of the key things that comes up is that often a representation is good for a certain thing, right? But it's not good for everything. So there's implicitly this notion of transitions between different representations, right? So Haijun explored this as like different levels you can move between. But when you do that, there's also a transaction cost associated with that. Like you have to issue a command, or you have to do some kind of animation, or shift your mental model when you move between these representations. So it might not always be worth it, right? And so there's some cases in even in some of the examples like text lists and passages. You mentioned in a couple places there's this risk of there's you could have a split attention issue, right? Am I focused on the document, or am I focused on the side panel, right? There's also one which I don't think you mentioned. You might have mentioned it offhand somewhere, but implicitly there's also a competition for screen real estate, right? So you've got your document, but then you've got this other panel that also has to be visible side by side with the document. And most, like for example, when you did the demo today, the recorded demo, that was on a pretty large screen device, right? So for example, if you took this same concept and boiled it down to like a laptop or a tablet, or probably a mobile phone is it's probably asking too much of that little real estate. But there is this notion of things like split attention, limited screen real estate, making the round trip from the text document to the side panel and then back to create a textlet, right? These are all costs. So the question is are these costs, do these costs end up being worth it? How do you think about these kind of trade-offs, right? Because you're really talking about trade-offs. Is the new representation and the cost to move to that representation worth it in terms of the value that you deliver to people? Maybe for patent examiners there, maybe as Victoria was hinting, maybe for more generalized users, it's maybe it's not there, or maybe it is. Maybe this kind of pattern is more ubiquitous than we realized, and if it was surfaced in the right way, it could you could dramatically simplify something like Word, which has thousands of commands in it, right? I mean, just as an aside on that, I mean, if you saw some of the telemetry for Word and looked at how often people use various commands, it's kind of shocking how low the usage is on almost everything, even things like commands like bold and italics that you think is like, everyone would do that, right? It's like, it's actually a pretty low percentage of it, even like basic commands like that. So yeah, the numbers drop like dramatically quickly, like beyond just like typing characters and copy and paste.
Okay. So just to get a question about it, that's actually interesting because you have a data. So the most commands people use in word processor are typing keystrokes and copy and paste, right?
Yeah, I actually don't. I'm not privy to like the exact data, but I'm just like, those are the kind of things that you see surfaces like more than like 10% of people use. Like,
I see.
And even things like something like paste special, for example, is like I'm sure it's like less than like 1/10 of 1% of people like ever touch that command, right?
Okay.
It's very low.
Yeah. Okay. So your question is about what's the cost of those representations and multiple representations. So actually, I have this story that when we first create this text list. As you can see, one of them, we're not trying to create a side panel. There's no side panel at the very beginning. And we added side panel. I was actually worried. I mean, there's several ways we can have a directive on the text itself or create a side panel. And we're kind of worried that this kind of side panel, as I said, it will shift their attentions into a side panel instead of focus on the main text. But our user evaluation afterwards, it actually say that it's a good thing. That a lot of people appreciate that because they don't want to go to the main text. It's too long. There's a lot of. So I think what really happens here is that these new representations increase the relevancy of information exposed to the users. They find it more relevant there, and for their justice tasks, and they don't need to look at. Or actually, from one of the quotes, say, I don't want to look at the things. It's really good to actually. And then once they shift their attention to the side panel, the direct replacement on the side panel. Before we didn't have it. We add it on because once they replace it. Because before you can directly replace only in the main text area. So what happens is like the shift their attention, then user wants to have more interact with side panel directly. So we started as that kind of thing. So I think one of the things about this cost, by this example, the story I'm telling you, is that some of times those representation is really increasing the relevancy of that information instead of another representations where actually it's not a cost, it's a benefit. That's one of the example of this. And then you mentioned about creating different representation of real estate. I want to talk about creating representation. I have another anecdote for this as well. I was talking to a mathematician, and what he does, he will write down the mathematical equations on a piece of paper, and he will type. He will write on paper, and then when he discusses with his colleagues, he will write on the whiteboard. And after he write on the whiteboard, he will directly just looking at the things on the whiteboard and type it into his LaTeX. And I was asking, why don't you just directly type your LaTeX, and as your colleague is writing on this? And he was telling me, when you see me, I'm copying stuff, but I'm not copying. And during the copying pace, like mental copying, I'm actually checking if the proof is correct. And so this kind of a transition between creating new representation, transition between representation, I think sometimes actually have this kind of reinforcement, kind of a learning about how they understand the concept. I mean, that's one of the things I find interesting from one of another user stories. And then you talk about real estates. That's really true. And when we're giving this demo, we're trying to see, okay, what are the right size we want to demonstrate drag and drop between windows on the different sizes, and just really a lot of windows out there. So that's, the overlapping windows and this kind of a montage kind of help with that. But yeah, I think it's really really true about Windows management. There's a lot of other research about this, and how to make it. I don't, for example, it would be totally different interaction if you want to do this on a mobile phone, which I start to do right now. I start to do text editing on my Google Doc on my mobile phone, which is very different than even some spreadsheets on the mobile phone, and it's very so small, and there's only things, and with that, I see people doing it on the bus, and I think that's kind of an interesting challenge to see how we adapt it to that kind of environment and to still provide productivity to that kind of a real estate you only have. Yeah, that's my that's my answer. I didn't summarize this time.
That's right. Yeah, maybe in the interest of time, I'll just stop there. But yeah, I could talk to you all day about this thesis. But yeah, very nice work, and thank you for the nice presentation as well.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we will continue with Michel.
Thank you, Sarah. Well, I want to congratulate you. I think this was an amazing presentation you gave, and you're an amazing person. You popped up in my office one day, coming from St. Andrews, and we talked about the ERC project and these ideas, and I didn't quite know what to make of you. So I give you a chance, and you really took it and ran with it. One thing is that this whole project, I mean, the topic of your thesis was not about document editing. I don't remember what we wrote on on the thing at the beginning, but it was more abstract. And in one of my previous functions as head of the department here, ended up in a meeting with a dozen lawyers, which is one of the worst things that can happen in your life. And they were all arguing about a contract and should we write this word in the plural or the singular, or and so I lost interest very quickly. But then I focused on how they were working. They all had their laptops open and the paper copy of the contract, and I realized they can't use a Word to save their lives, even though all the features are there. And then, I told you this story, and to Miguel as well, and that's where it all started. Mm-hmm. And I had no plan to focus on text documents particularly. And I think it's quite fantastic that you were able to run 3 entire projects in the time of the thesis, in the middle of a pandemic, with EPO, which was not always the easiest institution to work with. And every time with, as you showed, a study, prototyping, and a prototype that was, well, two of them were tested with real users and all that. Mm-hmm. You worked collaboratively with lots of people, and I think that's one of your strengths, really, to do this kind of work. And you learn, and you, for someone who was not sort of raised here in our master's program, you really took our methods and concepts and ran with it. So it's been really a very great sort of pass through this thesis. I'm so sad that because of the pandemic, you didn't have the chance to present when you had 2 papers with honorable mentions. We really cross fingers we'll be in New Orleans in a month, so you can also see this other side of research, which is linking with other people, but you've been very good at this yourself through virtual means. So, I mean, I'm only going to ask one question because, we've talked a lot about many things, and I think there was a lot of good questions that have been touching on topics that are of interest. But if it hadn't been working on documents, what would have you liked to work on? Or what would you like to work on next? I mean, are you going to be Mr. Text Editing and file management? Or do you want to sort of say, okay, well, now I need to move on to something else and something more sexy?
Well, text is kind of sexy, but yeah, at the very one beginning, I actually want to work for assistant technologies to help more disabled people or mental health, that kind of thing, because I think that's really a powerful technology that I believe can even, because I was working, so here's a story. I was doing my bachelor degree in mechanical engineering, like more welding engineering, really on that, and I did this internship working with. They are trying to develop exoskeleton robots, like help patients to stand up, and the patient have spinal cord injury, so they cannot feel their body anymore. So I was working with them, and so basically do the evaluation in the hospital with patients. And we started to develop some relationship together. We have lunch together. And just one day, I was having lunch with a patient, and he said, Han, I actually don't know if your thing's gonna work, and there's a lot of bugs and a lot of breakdowns, But you know why I'm still trying? I said, I don't know. And he said, because you give me hope. You give me hope that one day I might walk again. I think that really touches me, and that's why I feel like if in your lifetime you can do something to help those people, have some little bit impact, and I think it's worse. And that's the time I also realized, okay, maybe PhD could be my thing, because I never thought I was gonna do a PhD at very beginning. So yeah, to come back to your question, and but when arriving in this lab, I was like, oh yeah, you guys do that creativity, dance, music. So wow, that's so cool. I didn't know art before, you know, and I thought about that, but I was like, oh yeah, and then I work on the thing. I think the thing really gives me what it really gives me is a fundamental. I try to understand what is the interface. I think really this kind of a fundamental work about text editing, where it's coming from, help me to really understand, okay, what is the interface, and what are we trying to do here? What is the power of it? So yeah, so I appreciate this work, and I think it's cool, and voila.
Thank you.
So the last question are for me.
Yeah.
You got already a lot. I have a lot too.
Okay.
But I know where you are, so I will keep some of them just for the two of us, and I will only keep for today, let's say 2. So the very first one is on the provenance.
Yeah.
So you use provenance at several times, both
Yeah.
during your presentation and in your document. And my understanding is that for you, provenance always mean location. So what we call in the database community the where provenance. What about the how provenance? The provenance that help explaining, helping user understanding why a result is there and why it's not another one. Is it something that you're interested in or not?
I see what you mean. Okay.
So the process that makes this piece of text being there and not being somewhere else.
Yeah, I mean, at the very beginning, that's how we know each other as well. I was working on something with Jupyter Notebook, which is for people who don't know here, it's kind of documents, like kind of documents where you can write text and code and visualization together, and where it's really keeping this format you can continue, and so your process is automatically not automatic, like naturally documents it into this notebook. That's why I also call it notebook. And the problem thing, I think in that case, the concept really mattered because you are doing data analysis tasks. And the reason why I started to shift, like this is related to a Firewaiver paper, right? Is that I realized, by talking to those people, I realized their documentation process not only happens in the single tools, not only happens in this Jupyter Notebook. And here's one of my users, I actually interviewed him. Anyways, there's a lot, they use different stuff and do different, sometimes you grab different stuff. Sometimes, some people told me I want to debug, I will use in pie charts, and I will combine different tools. And then I just have this realization that, and also they come to a point with Julian, which is a collaborator here. That's why I said it's a user innovation, because he actually wrote a script already, automated this part, linked different things together. So I talked to him, I was like, yeah, why don't we do something together to create an interface for this? And so what I trying to, that really kind of shift my understanding. I mean, before, I think, okay, application is great. You look at the thing, you don't know what's the problem with it. But when you see really people was doing this, even the Jupyter Notebook, what's they're trying to do very simple. Like before, you have code editor and the document tool, and now it's just trying to put it a little bit together. And then I start to shift this knowledge, shift the thing about we're not trying to creating apps that incorporate everything. And of course, a lot of people are trying to do that, but we're trying to see how we can adapt to come to this activity thing Yannick was asking. And I think there's still a lot of provenance. Activity was like, if you look at the history of activity, I guess that's what you talk about, actually, the provenance of a process. And still a lot of things to do with that. And I think it's the hard thing is, right now we're focused on the example I showed is actually on a physical notebook. But Wendy did some work with merging the physical things with digital one, and Jim as well. And this time we didn't choose to do that. Is because we really focus on the digital parts, and part of the things is because the limitation is not really a direction. We're working on the hardware part. And I think this web of activities across different artifacts and trying to get that, it's still really worth exploring. And I haven't really, you're right. I mean, I haven't talked to any database people, and I should talk to database people, understand more about provenance. Yeah, I think that's a more interdisciplinary approach. Yeah, I think provenance, I think, kind of in the surface level a little bit. Yeah, I will acknowledge that.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And my second question is more on file viewer,
Yeah.
because I really like the approach, but I missed.
Yeah.
So if you can
Sure.
give me
Let me go back to
something,
slides.
yeah, to see
okay, so this
something
one.
where you have the abstract view, various level of granularity of documents. So I was wondering
okay.
on your graph, on the graph that you can manage and
Oh yeah, this one.
yeah, for example. Yes, exactly.
Okay.
So here I actually have two kind of questions. The very first one is, what is, in a sense, the meaning for you, the semantic for a user of the new abstract things on the...
So the whole idea was coming from that, I was looking at this because I was confused as well, like a PNG. I mean, do you know the difference between PNG and JPG?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, and a lot of people I talk to didn't know, because as I look at it, because those extensions, from my understanding, was primary for, it's kind of a sense for computers, in a sense, how we're going to contain your data into this kind of format. And when I was talking to them, they were, when they referring to the data, they're just referring to, yeah, that graph I created when I created experiments compared to the algorithm. That's a graph I remember. It's a green graph, and they change with that. So that's actually what they remember. It's just this graph thing, and they don't. But they have to create those kind of different extensions for different render. For example, if you want to use for the different purposes, like a scalable, I want to use PDF and another one. So that's when we have this idea about, we have the different variations. That variation is part of the relationship of the files. Yeah.
So all of the files that are on the left-hand side are
No,
only variation of the same.
Yeah. Those are the things, SVG, PNG.
It's not provenance. It's not.
It's not provenance. No. It's different variations. Like, think about, this is your cat, right?
Okay.
Or this is your cat. This is your, I
And
don't know if your cat or
meanings,
dogs.
The blue thing is different from the.
The blue thing, yeah. This one is, for example, this one will be yeah. So that was a little bit thing I think was based on the GPG, was one was chosen, but so that was kind of a show you with this in blue line, you get a sense of, okay, those are the connected. Yeah, both talk about my cats, and based on your process, you'll say I want to share my cats with my friends, which are high resolution picture. Maybe I would choose one format, and the system was able to see. Right now we have some predefined rules to see that when you do this activity, we'll choose this format for you, but user is able to define that themselves.
Okay.
It's very simple design. When we talk about this, how we understand it, it's a folder, but it's not a folder. Like, because one of the way we think about the in the file system, one way to categorize your file, the only mechanism is folder. You create a new folder, you put it into it.
Mm-hmm.
And when I think about, maybe there's some different levels, kind of this kind of a level we can create, and rather than just a folder. But I don't know if we are actually, since we don't have user studies on this, I think it's really worth exploring that, if you really actually make it complicated or actually make it simple.
Yeah. I'm asking that because actually
Sure.
in the workflows we have kind of a similar process where you can ask user to see really the pipelines, the analysis pipeline at various level of granularity.
I see.
And sometimes some of the task is taking the meaning of a lot of tasks where actually they are only doing formatting, changing the kind of extension, and
I see.
So it reminds me that kind of solution, and then you have in a sense some constraint on the kind of structure that the graph can have.
Yeah.
Otherwise, when you do your abstraction, in a sense, you're giving misleading information to the user. So I was
see what you mean.
wondering whether or not you have that kind of problem here.
Yeah.
But it's probably difficult to discuss that this way, but already I have
I see what you mean. Okay.
opinions.
Yeah, a good user feedback. Yes, I noted that. Yeah. I should show it to you actually before by using Victoria's method actually to pumping up to you and discuss with you. Yeah. Yeah, it's probably my response for that. Yeah. I think it's because we created this thing during. I remember when doing this project is really just COVID started to happen, and the storyboard I just enjoyed that at my home. I don't have all these things. I just did it, and that's also why we didn't haven't done any. Actually, we'll continue working on this and trying to see if we can really people can try to use them to see if it really makes sense. I think that can provide more answers for this. Yeah,
Okay.
it remains as a limitation.
Thank
Yeah.
you very much.
Yeah.
So is there any last question that we need to answer before we deliberate, or is that...
I'm good. I'm writing notes up furiously, which I will transmit over email.
Okay, great. So
we can ask the people to leave the room so we can.
yeah.
Okay. And now we're gonna move this table. Yeah. Hold on, we're gonna move the table here. And
stop sharing the screen.
Okay,
I'd
yeah.
like to see a bigger picture.
Actually.
You're all really teeny.
Oh.
You should see the zoom option
Okay,
somewhere.
stop sharing. Okay, I got it.
There we go. That's so much better. We feel so much more present. It was like looking down the wrong end of a telescope.
Okay, great. So we got it here.
Ready?
Yeah.
Okay. So bad news. No, I'm sorry. So we are very happy that we deliberated. So we say that you have presented your PhD work, which was a timely topic. The PhD community really appreciated the clarity of your oral presentation. We say that your presentation was particularly polished, dynamic, and enthusiastic, and we are very grateful for that. We also say that we have a very high quality on the discussion that followed this presentation. So members wanted to say that you have a great depth on your work, which was really impressive. So on actually 4 points. The very first one is on ethnographic studies, the second one on design, then on your ability to prototype your solution, to provide also user experiments, and going also to the theoretical contribution, which was a particularly large and deep kind of contribution. So on the exchange with the committee, we all thought that those exchange allowed you, let's say, us to appreciate your strong motivation, your high maturity, and your ability to be an effective collaborator, and to have even a vision on your topic, although all this work has been done in the COVID period, which we realized was not the most easiest period in the world. And you have clearly demonstrated your mastery on your topic. As for the perspective, let's say that although the presentation did not have a specific part on the perspective as it's most of the time expected, let's say that we all think that you have been completely able to convince us and to draw various perspectives and even to show a very interesting research agenda, both with cross-device and cross-application topics, which are both hard and very important research questions. So for all those reasons, radio, French-English, de docteur de l'université, pardon, docteur en informatique de l'université Paris-Saclay, avec toutes nos félicitations.
Where's the music coming from?
Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Sure.
Okay, yeah. Congrats.
And remote ones. Thank you very much. I give you a hug here.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Okay. Have something to say?
Everything is under control.
Some thank you speech.
That's too long.
Yeah.
That's right, yeah, that's too bad.
Do you prefer 2 speeches?
No, just, okay. So when I look back at the past 3 years, I feel fortunate I've been able to finish the thesis in the company of an incredibly generous, supportive, and inspiring group of people. To Michelle, I offer my heartfelt gratitude. It is from you that I learned to pick the right research question, think deeply, challenge the obvious, and communicate the key messages. I've learned that what it takes to do great work: vision, high standard, and hard work. Those things have pushed and will always push me to achieve the best as I can, to do great work. I don't think I could ever learn enough of you. Every conversation with you, I learn something. And thank you, Wendy. I learned so much from you. Thank you for sharing your vast knowledge about conducting research and all your experience. I will never forget the energy you have when we talk about research, and that energy is contagious. And thank you, the jury members, Sarah, Jim, Janik, Victoria, and Ken, for your interest and support and advice for my research and career. I appreciate it. And thank you, Victoria and Ken, for making time in the early morning for this. I hope I will see you in California and Kai in your audience. To all my collaborators, Miguel, Julian, Injong, Junhan, Hafal, and Alex, I'm lucky to have a chance to work with you guys. We worked hard, and your contribution to the thesis is enormous. I've learned so much from you. Thank you, Junhan, as well, for showing me design and showing me how to use my eyes to see good design. With you, we're able to make the vision a reality. Working with you is one of the most creative periods in the past 3 years. Thank you for supporting me to the end of this journey by being my technical support for this event. You are the best producer. We need to make a movie together. And to Domenico, who's actually joined the call here, the director of the European Patent Office. Thank you for accepting my research proposal and your generous support and trust to a young researcher. I will always remember the first time we met in the business meeting, and you brought sense of humor to the seriousness of the meeting. It reminds you of what Jason Klee said: being funny does not make the business we're discussing less serious. I truly believe it. And my girlfriend, Milan, you let me see the exciting part of life outside of research. You bring the sunshine to me, I bring HCI to you. And you have this unique ability to see my research in a crystal clear way. Thank you for just being yourself. Merci Pierre et Béatrice pour tout l'accueil à Toulouse et pour venir ici. Pierre, je me souviens de la fois où j'ai monté ma démo. And lastly, to my mom and dad, I know that you guys are always there for me as my parents who give me love, but also as friends who give me advice about life. You will always be my mentors, no matter how many doctor degrees I have. Thank you all very much. I don't know if Domenico wants to say something?
Okay, good evening, everybody. Well done, Evan, because we called you Evan. So thank you for mentioning it. Also, yes, okay, as Michelle said during this intervention, well, we are difficult. We are a big international organization, and okay, unfortunately, but in the end, we managed to help you. I think you did a very interesting job. I follow almost everything because sometimes the video was not easy with the YouTube, but yeah, okay, I think, well, okay, I don't want to say anything about the technical part, about the examiner and about the artificial intelligence, because I'm a little bit against the people rejecting new technology, etc. But despite we are in the temple of innovation, in the end we are human, as you said. But okay, so I think what you did, I think is very interesting. I don't know whether the office will take up some of what you did it, but really we learn. I mean, my colleagues, myself, we learn a lot working with you. And okay, well done, and I wish you success in all your life, technical, academic, industry, wherever you go after this experience. And it was a pleasure also to meet the people from University Sacré, Michel, and the other colleagues. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now we have to prepare some on the other building because I can't see soon. I'm closing 1 minute, so we
Yeah.
Can we just have 5 more minutes?
Yeah.
Yeah, you have a message from your parents, though they're not here, but they leave.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Surprise here.
I think.
儿子，这是我们的幸运，你看看哈，由于疫情原因没回来，我们搬家了，搬到这个好的地方来了。就是你要博士毕业了，我们呢，感到很欣慰，感到很欣慰。
你博士毕业，祝福你哈儿子。还记得小的时候呢？我记得你小的时候，你爸爸在西昌上班。有时候呢，给你买的那个汽车，你都坐大车，新汽车看大车。你说我想看下它啥个标准，那时候我觉得你很难学习。到了初中的时候，还有一件事情，那一天天气特别冷，刮风下雨的，我就说你爸爸开起汽车把你送到学校，你说不用，哪怕今天只要不下暴子。我都自己去，我自己的事情自己想做。他说：“你说如果没得汽车的家庭，他就不做。”我就觉得你很懂事。大学毕业的时候，我和你爸爸一起去旅游，当时让我一件事也很动心。记得我们在杭州的折头山的时候，鼓得一塌糊涂，所有人都在抱怨：“哎，这个车子咋那么贵嘛？”但是你告诉了我一件事情。当你不能改变这个生活现实的时候，你就调整自己的心情，然后自己的接受这个事实的心情。我当时和我朋友说了这件事情，我觉得我这50岁了，我都有付出，有付出，证明实实在在的证明你成熟，你独立了，这是我和你爸爸最大的感受，最大的欣慰。我是要毕业了。我觉得你成长了，马上也快速进步。我只希望在你今后的人生中，担当起所有的责任，独立独行，快快乐乐度过自己的一生。好，因为这是我爸爸送给你的一束花，你要是不要康乃馨。希望你在人生快快乐乐像这样粉粉红红的。儿子，祝福你，博士毕业快乐。好。
哦哇！哇！
好了。
Now it's our turn to drink. Thank you. Thank you, guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good luck with everything.
Thank you. Yeah.
Good luck.
Bye bye. Ciao.
Bye.
Bye.
Have a good day.